The wind hits you before you even open your eyes. It cuts through the animal hide wrapped around your body like it isn't there. Your breath rises in a cloud of white vapor. The ground beneath you is frozen solid. And somewhere outside, in the darkness, something is moving. This is not a nightmare. This is Tuesday. For roughly 100,000 years, this was the only morning your ancestors knew. The last glacial maximum, the peak of the most recent ice age, gripped the planet between about 26,000 and 19,000 years ago. Ice sheets 2 miles thick buried what is now London, Chicago, and Stockholm. Average global temperatures were 6 to 9 degrees Celsius colder than today. That doesn't sound like much. But the difference between that number and today is the difference between a thriving civilization and a frozen wasteland. And your ancestors walked straight into it. Not by accident. Not because they had no choice. But because the human body and the human mind had already spent hundreds of thousands of years becoming something extraordinary. How did they do it? The answer is stranger, more brutal, and more impressive than anything Hollywood has ever shown you. Let's start with the cold itself. Your body right now is doing something remarkable. It is maintaining a core temperature of 37 degrees Celsius, 98.6 Fahrenheit, regardless of what the air around you is doing. It burns through your stored energy to generate that heat. In a cold environment, it burns more. In a freezing environment, it burns significantly more. And in a full ice age winter, without modern insulation, it burns at a rate that would kill you in hours if you let it. Your ancestors knew this, not in the scientific language we use today, but they knew it in their bodies, in their behavior, in the decisions they made every single day. The first decision was fire. The controlled use of fire goes back at least 400,000 years, with evidence from sites like Kizim Cave in Israel and Wonderwork Cave in South Africa suggesting even earlier use. By the time the Ice Age reached its peak, fire wasn't a discovery for your ancestors. It was a given, a mastered tool, something as ordinary as breathing. But maintaining fire in Ice Age conditions was not simple. Finding dry fuel when everything was frozen or buried under snow required knowledge. Real knowledge. The kind that took generations to accumulate and pass on. Your ancestors would have known exactly which trees, dead birch, dried spruce, produced wood that caught fast and burned long. They would have known how to carry embers wrapped in moss or dried fungus to preserve fire across long journeys. They would have known where to build a fire inside a shelter to heat the maximum amount of air while consuming the minimum amount of wood. This was not instinct. This was science. Ancient, embodied, life or death science. And then there was shelter. Archaeologist Olga Soffer, who spent decades studying Upper Paleolithic sites across Eastern Europe, found evidence that Ice Age humans were not simply huddling in caves. They were engineering habitats. At sites like Mezherik in modern Ukraine, researchers uncovered the remains of huts built from the bones and tusks of woolly mammoths. Massive, interlocking structures designed to anchor animal hides stretched over a rigid frame. These were not crude dens. They were architectural decisions, calculated responses to a specific environmental problem. A well-built mammoth-bone hut, covered in layered furs and partially dug into the earth for insulation, could maintain an interior temperature dozens of degrees warmer than the outside air. It was the Ice Age version of a modern insulated home, built by hand, by people with no written instructions, no engineering degrees, no supply chain, just accumulated knowledge, passed down through story, through demonstration, through survival. But shelter and fire only solve part of the problem. The deeper problem is calories. In extreme cold, your body demands more fuel. A modern human in a temperate climate needs roughly 2,000 calories a day. A human living and moving in Ice Age conditions, hunting, building, carrying, staying warm, may have needed 3 times that. Some estimates go even higher. And the landscape around them was not a grocery store. It was a frozen, unpredictable wilderness where food moved, hid, and fought back. Your ancestors were hunters, but not in the way most people picture it. One heroic figure sprinting after a single animal with a spear. The large-scale cooperative hunting of Ice Age megafauna, woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, giant elk, cave lions, required something that no other animal on Earth had developed to the same degree. It required planning, communication, division of labor, trust. Researchers like Pat Shipman of Penn State University have argued that the hunting strategies of Upper Paleolithic humans showed a level of coordination that fundamentally separates them from every other predator in the ecosystem. They used topography. They identified bottlenecks, narrow valleys, river crossings, cliff edges, and drove herds toward them. They made noise, used fire, and coordinated movements across large distances. They took animals 10 times their size not by being stronger, but by being smarter and more organized. And when they made a kill, nothing was wasted. Nothing. The meat was consumed or preserved. Fat was rendered for fuel and for waterproofing skin. Bones were cracked for marrow, one of the most calorie-dense foods available in that environment. Tendons were dried and used as cordage. Hides were scraped, softened, and stitched into clothing so precisely tailored that archaeologist Ian Gilligan has argued the sophistication of Ice Age clothing rivaled what most people wore well into the medieval period. Now let's reconstruct a specific day. Not a dramatic day of mammoth hunting. An ordinary one. You wake before dawn inside the hut. The fire has burned low overnight. The first task, always the first task, is feeding it. You add a few lengths of pre-split birchwood kept dry inside the shelter. The flames climb. The temperature inside the hut begins to rise toward bearable. Outside, the sky is a pale gray. The ground is covered in hard-packed snow. You pull on your layered clothing, a base layer of soft furs with the hide against your skin for maximum warmth retention, an outer layer of heavier hide sewn tight at the wrists and ankles to trap body heat. Your footwear is wrapped and tied. You have learned, as every person in your group has learned, that wet feet in this environment can mean frostbite within hours. The group has scouts, 2 younger adults who went out at first light to check the game trails. They return within the hour. They have seen tracks, a small herd of reindeer moving along a frozen river valley 2 hours walk to the east. The group begins to move. What happens next is not chaos. It is choreography. Positions are assigned. Flankers break off to the right and left. The wind direction is considered. You must approach from downwind or the animals will scatter before you are close enough. The children and elders stay behind. The group moves in near silence, communicating with hand signals developed over generations of shared experience. The hunt takes most of the morning. It is exhausting and cold and occasionally terrifying, but it succeeds. And when it does, the work is only beginning. The carcass must be processed quickly before the cold sets in and the meat freezes solid in a way that makes it difficult to use. Everyone works. There is no rank that exempts you from this labor. By late afternoon, the group is back inside the shelter. Meat is roasting. Fat is being rendered over low heat. The children are being fed first. And in the long, dark hours of the evening, something else happens. Something that may be the most important survival strategy of all. They talk. They sing. They tell stories. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner of the University of Utah conducted a landmark study in 2014, comparing the daytime and nighttime conversations of the Jew/Hoansi hunter-gatherers of the Kalahari. During the day, conversations were largely practical, food, logistics, complaints. But at night, around the fire, 81% of conversation shifted to stories. Moral tales, accounts of great hunts, descriptions of people and places far away. Wiesner argued that this nightly storytelling was not entertainment in the trivial sense. It was social technology. It allowed people to share information across distances they had not personally traveled. It built and maintained the web of relationships and obligations that made large-scale cooperation possible. Without it, the planning required for a successful mammoth hunt, coordinating with groups from neighboring territories, navigating disputes, maintaining alliances, would have been impossible. Your ancestors did not survive the Ice Age because they were physically tougher than you. They weren't, particularly. They survived because they were socially and cognitively sophisticated in ways that still astound researchers today. Here is the twist that most people miss. For decades, the dominant narrative of Ice Age humans was one of desperate survival, small, frightened bands barely clinging to existence in the margins of a frozen world. But the archaeological evidence tells a different story. Sites like Chauvet Cave in France, dated to roughly 36,000 years ago, contain paintings of extraordinary complexity and beauty. Charging rhinoceroses, herds of horses, lions in motion, all rendered with a confidence and compositional skill that would not look out of place in a modern art gallery. These were not the marks of a species under existential siege. These were the marks of a species that had the cognitive bandwidth, the safety, the time, the psychological surplus to make art. Your ancestors were not just surviving the Ice Age. They were living in it, fully, with creativity, with social bonds, with culture. And that is the truth the frozen record keeps trying to tell us. The cold did not break them. In some measurable sense, it built them. The pressure of those long winters, the absolute necessity of cooperation, the demand for planning and foresight and knowledge transmission. These forces shaped the social architecture that your brain is still running on today. When you feel the pull toward other people in times of stress, that is Ice Age software. When you want to tell a story instead of just stating a fact, that is something your ancestors refined around a fire 30,000 years ago. When your body generates heat under pressure, when you read the weather instinctively, when you feel calmer and more capable in a group than alone, you are running ancient code. The wind hits you before you even open your eyes. But now you know what kind of creature opens them anyway.